Focal has a history of selling high-end audio products spanning across 4 decades. They are well regarded for not only their home audio products, but also for their numerous car audio products and indeed their headphones. In fact, the Utopia is often cited as being an ultimate reference set of headphones. However, the Utopia is a headphone that has a retail price tag of nearly $4,000, which is just way out of reach for the vast majority of folks out there, yours truly included. What we've got here though is the Stellia, which is a more affordable and a closed back pair of headphones from Focal. There's no question about it, the Stellia is a beautifully crafted set of cans. What I like in particular is just how unique and striking it looks, but without having to resort to any over-the-top or in-your-face design elements. I think the color too works very well in this regard. I'm a big fan of brown leather, but normally I wouldn't really be a fan of metal being anodized brown. In the case of the Stellia, however, I think it works really well. I also feel that the few silver accents here and there help to just break it up a bit, and I'm sure if it was all brown, that would look rather drab and boring. Overall, the design is very much what we would expect from Focal. The shape of the ear cups, the yoke, and the headband are similar, and in some cases downright identical, to the likes of the Clear, Elia, Elegia, and even the Utopia. One design aspect that I like in particular is how the ear cups are spring-loaded. If you have a feel around your ear at the transition point between your lower jaw and your neck, you'll probably feel a bit of a concave area. Now, due to how headphones sit on your head, this area in particular can often break the seal between the ear pads and your ears, and this then can alter the frequency response, especially in terms of the bass frequencies. So, by having these ear cups spring-loaded, this adds a little bit of extra pressure at the bottom of the ear cup to ensure that the seal isn't broken. Whilst I really like the fact that Focal thought about this issue and addressed it, what it also means is that the Stellia can feel just a little bit uncomfortable at first. Because other headphones don't really add this type of added pressure to the bottom of the ear cup, it's just something to get used to. There is a fair amount of weight here, but the headband padding is not only nice and soft, but it is also distributed along the entire inside of the headband, with the most padding being situated in the middle. Speaking of padding, the ear pads too are something worth noting. I would have to compare them directly to the Bose Quiet Comfort 35 series to say for certain, but these earpads do remind me of those in terms of just how soft and comfortable they are. The other added benefit of these earpads is that their softness also helps to alleviate the slight pressure you might feel due to the aforementioned spring-loaded ear cups. Usually I can be quite susceptible to some lower jaw discomfort, but in the case of the Stellia I didn't feel that at all despite those spring-loaded ear cups. Honestly, the only other slight discomfort I felt after extended listening sessions was some heat buildup in the ear cups. Admittedly, this is probably due to the fact that I've gotten used to wearing open back headphones, so this might just be a case of me noticing something that I'm no longer used to, rather than picking up on something which is a genuine issue. After a week or so of using the Stellia, this is something which I hardly notice at all anymore, so I don't think it would be fair to call this a problem. Actually, a slight bit of heat buildup is something which you can expect to feel on most closed-back headphones anyways. And speaking of closed-back headphones, at first glance and at a bit of a distance, the Stellia almost looks like an open back. That off-center concentric pattern is pretty unique, and yet it's not so different as to look gaudy. On the inside of these circular cutouts is what appears to be the same leather as is used on the headband. Overall, I think it's a very cool design, and it'll be interesting to see if perhaps Focal ends up using this particular ear cup design for an open back model in the future. I guess if I had to mention a disappointment, then it would be the cable. It feels very well made, don't get me wrong, and the fit and finishing is superb, but it is also rather stiff. This means that it can be susceptible to microphonics, and it also can sometimes feel a bit like it's got a mind of its own. But really, that's the only real negative that I can come across. As far as the sound is concerned, the first thing that struck me about the sound is how there's one aspect in particular that immediately reminded me of the HD820 from Sennheiser, and that's the width of the presentation. We'll compare their respective frequency responses in a little bit and see if we can spot any similarities, but for now, let's focus on the Stellia. As we can see, Focal did a pretty great job here. The overall response is remarkably smooth and well balanced. The bass frequencies especially remain pretty linear, even when digging deep down into the 10 Hz mark. There's a little bit of a hump at around 100 Hz, followed by a slight dip to around 250 Hz, but then things stay pretty flat all the way to just past 2 kHz. The rest of the upper registers have a few peaks and dips, but nothing that stands out as being problematic. The one area that always concerns me is that 8 to 10 kHz region, as I can be particularly susceptible to overly sharp peaks here. As we can see, there is a peak here, but it's very well balanced with the bass and mids, and this comes across when I listen to the Stellia. Sometimes I'll listen to a track and then I can kind of feel that 9 kHz peak creeping in, but then it never gets to that point where it annoys me. I've only heard maybe a handful of other headphones that control this particular frequency range this well, at least with respect to how my ears react to that range. I think the only downside here would be that some people might find the bass, especially the sub-bass, a bit lacking. But then again, those who are willing to spend $3,000 on a set of headphones are likely already accustomed to a flatter, more balanced signature, so perhaps this isn't a downside at all. But if you want a little more bass presence, then the Stellia will likely pair rather well with a tube amplifier. Because tube amps tend to have higher output impedances than solid-state amps, they often can affect the frequency response of many headphones in a measurable and indeed audible manner. In the case of the Stellia, we can see that the bass and sub-bass frequencies become elevated as we switch between an output impedance of 0, 10 and 120 ohms. Now, despite the fact that the Stellia is a closed-back set of headphones, it still offers a sound field that reminds me very much of how a proper open-back set of headphones sound in that regard. I'm actually having a really hard time describing this because compared to my HD58X, the Stellia doesn't have quite the same sense of openness, and yet it still does seem like a wider presentation. Of course, Sennheiser's open-back headphones such as the HD600, 650 and 58X aren't exactly known for having a wide presentation, but they still do seem to avoid that in-your-head feeling, and that's exactly what I'm getting from the Stellia as well, only it sounds even wider. The other advantage here with a closed-back design is that, unlike an open-back design, the music won't leak out, and likewise ambient noise doesn't leak in. Those nice soft earpads are undoubtedly, at least to a large degree, responsible for how well the Stellia seals on the head. Finally, as mentioned, the Stellia's sound character did initially remind me somewhat of how I remember the HD820 to sound, and we can definitely see some similarities in the frequency response, with the closest match between the two being when the HD820 is connected to the amplifier on the 0 ohm output impedance and the Stellia on the 10 ohm output impedance. I should note that whilst the HD820 does have two pretty drastic dips in the bass regions, I can't really say that I noticed these dips when listening to the music. If we look at the graph as a whole, we can see that apart from those two bass dips on the HD820, the rest of the response follows a very similar trend. So, the time has come to discuss the elephant in the room, and that is the price tag. $3,000 certainly is not pocket change for the vast majority of people. Heck, some might not even spend that much on an entire audio system, let alone headphones. So, is the Stellia worth it? Honestly, the thing that really gets me, other than the really refined and enjoyable sound signature, is the build quality. There really is absolutely nothing about these headphones that don't feel premium to me. Okay, maybe the cable can be a little bit annoying, but other than that, these headphones just oozes with quality. The attention to detail and the quality control of the construction is fantastic. So, at least if you do get to the stage of parting with $3,000, you're not going to feel like you've wasted your money. But what about the competition? Well, of the headphones that I've been able to review at this price level, I can only compare the Stellia to Sennheiser and Hi-Fi-Man. If you've read or watched some of my other reviews, you'll know exactly where I stand in terms of Hi-Fi-Man, in particular with their build quality. In that regard, the Stellia is miles ahead of any Hi-Fi-Man headphones that I've tried, and I honestly can't think of a single Hi-Fi-Man that sounded notably better than the Stellia. Of course, I would ideally like to compare the Stellia to a set of hi-fi directly, but as of now I can't think of anything that really stood out to me. So that leaves us with Sennheiser. As mentioned, the Stellia reminded me quite a lot of the HD820, and the similarities show in their frequency response graphs. But where the Stellia does easily overtake the HD820 is in the construction. The Sennheiser features quite a lot of plastic, which does not feel cheap, but it simply doesn't feel as premium as the metal construction of the Stellia. Then there's also that concave Gorilla Glass on the ear cups of the HD820, which I think kind of looks cool, but ultimately does seem like it would be rather brittle in the long run. Oh, and let's not forget the low clamping force of the HD820, which can have a pretty drastic effect on the sound character. As a side note, Sennheiser is aware of this clamping force issue, and they've recommended that you wrap some bungee cords around the headphone when not using them in order to slightly deform the headband to a point where it will provide you with an adequate amount of clamping force and indeed seal between the earpads and your head. Getting back to the Stellia, sure, it does cost around $600 more than the HD820, but if you're looking for the complete package, a great sounding pair of headphones that not only look great but feel genuinely premium as well, then I strongly suggest that you at least check out the Stellia. Well, that's it for this review. Thanks so much for watching. Any questions and comments, please do leave them down below. Please hit that subscribe button, and if you've liked the review, please hit the like button. That's all from me for now, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.